I'm obviously going to not talk. I will say I'll prompt the poll when I launch it, and then I'll give everybody a minute to respond, and then I'll give them like a 5-second warning, and then I'll launch the results of the poll and let you guys take it back from there.
Okay, can you hear me okay, Brooke?
Yes.
Good.
Jim, is your door shut?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. I'm going to share my screen. All right, and we're gonna start here in 3 seconds.
You ready to go?
Yep.
Okay, so we're logged in with all our attendees.
Yes.
And Sahar, are you there?
I'm here.
And Corey?
Yep. Hey, good morning,
All
Jim.
right, very good. Well, welcome everybody. We're going to share some insights today on cannabis banking and understanding what's going on out there, preparing for the future as well. So thanks for attending. I have my partner, Corey Parnell, on the call with us on the Zoom, and also Sahar Aina Sazian. Thank you very much, both of you, for attending, helping us out here. We'll proceed through, I think, about 7 different topics over the next 40 or 50 minutes, leaving some time for questions at the end. And Brooke is moderating, our administrative assistant. And Brooke, I believe they can type questions into you.
They can, yes.
Excellent. Yep. So feel free to join with Brooke on any questions that you have. All right. Well, let's head into it and see our first topic. Well, I've done the introductions. So there's our smiling faces. I'd encourage all of you to visit our Bridge West website. We have a lot of good information there, many blogs that we've written and interviews and webinars, a lot of good information on the Bridge West website. And Sahar, I think the same can be said about Vicente Cederberg's website.
Absolutely. We certainly have a good amount of information on there, including blogs that really tend to cover the entirety of the cannabis industry, a large part of which is cannabis banking and banking related topics. Okay,
and a little background on Bridge West. We are a CPA firm, I believe the first and only in the world that's 100% devoted to the cannabis industry. It got started back in 2009. I think that's about when I first met Brian Vicente. And we do tax returns and audited financial statements, business valuations. We do a lot of work with our attorney friends like Vicente Cederberg on mergers and acquisitions, which is a very hot area right now. And then I do a lot of consulting. I do profitability consulting, which is one of the my favorite things to work on with clients and try to improve their margins and their bottom line. Sahar, did you want to say anything else about Vicente Cederberg before we move on?
Yeah, so much like Bridge West, we are wholly dedicated to the cannabis industry. We were founded back in 2010 when our founding partners created and passed legislation in Colorado for allowing recreational cannabis. And since then, we've grown to really have quite a national presence with offices in Denver, Los Angeles, Austin, Boston, Florida, New York, New Jersey, Michigan, as well as some work in the Midwest. And everything that we do is dedicated to cannabis and all of the cannabis industry's needs. So that includes licensing work, regulatory work, corporate, banking, intellectual property, a little bit of litigation. So we've really grown to encompass the entirety of the industry's needs at this point.
Yes, you certainly have. And like Vicente Cedarburg Bridge West has a national footprint. Corey, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, just like Sahar was saying that, basically our clients, they've taken us pretty much in every state that has some form of legal cannabis. And again, we've enjoyed working with all sizes, everything from a single dispensary operator up to the large MSOs that are publicly traded. So again, we've enjoyed working with Vicente Cedarburg. We've been able to cover a lot of ground, all the various legal issues, everything from the beginning to entity creation to merger and acquisition agreements. So again, Sahar, really enjoy working with your organization throughout the U.S.
Well, excellent. Well, let's jump right in then and see what we have to discuss today on banking issues for the cannabis industry. Okay, we're going to start out with a polling question, and that is, I believe, on the next slide. Yes, so do you have banking services? You know, when I started in on this industry in 2009, when I started accepting cannabis clients and signing their tax returns, we got paid in cash a lot, and it was very inconvenient. My bank certainly didn't like me making $5,000 deposits in cash, and we did not lose our checking account, but it was definitely added scrutiny. Now today, we very rarely get paid in cash. I would say, 99.9% of our fees are paid with checks. So our clients do have checking accounts. That's about all they have for banking services, and we'll talk more about that. They do have checking accounts. And so we do keep a list of the banks that issue the checks to us for our fees, so that we know if people ask us, who are the cannabis-friendly banks? And one of the themes we'll be hitting on today is being transparent with your bank and not trying to say you're a pizza shop or a florist. We'll talk more about that as we get into it. So do you have banking service? And if so, what are you paying? We're going to talk about fees this morning as well. It is expensive, and we'll talk about the reasons that it is that expensive. So thank you all for participating. And Brooke, do you know about how many attendees we have this morning?
I have about 86 registrants today.
86. Well, thank you all very much for joining, and I hope you enjoy the discussion. Next slide, please. Oh, wow, look at those instant results. We live in an age of instant information, don't we? Okay, but we still have 30% not banked. So yeah, after this seminar, we'd be happy to try to introduce you to some of our associates in the banking world, depending on what state you're in, and see if we can't get you hooked up. It's nice to see that a lot of people are paying under $1,000. Corey, Sahar, do you have any comments on the polling results?
Nope, I think that's great information. Appreciate everyone doing that, and maybe we jump into it.
Okay, let's move on. Okay, so I'll be acting as your master of ceremonies and handing it off to Sahar and Corey for their comments. I'll add a little color commentary as we go through. So we have an act before Congress to normalize banking for the cannabis industry. And some of you may have seen in the news that there's a good chance that this actually might get out of the House and over to the Senate because it was attached to a Department of Defense bill. And that all just happened probably in the last 5 or 10 days. So we'll watch and see what this Congress does, if they can get anything done. Very turbulent times back in Washington, D.C., as we all know right now. So we'll see if Congress can get at least this piece of it done and help our industry. I'll let the bullet points go. I'll start with Sahar. You want to tackle those bullet points?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much. So the Safe Banking Act, to give a little bit of background on it, has, for all of the last iterations of it that have been tried to be passed, what it's attempted to do really is to address and allay a lot of the fears and concerns that financial institutions, both banks and credit unions, have had as related to cannabis banking for a long time. which really tend to boil down to worrying about the loss of their banking charters, worrying about the loss of their NCUA or FDIC insurance, and worrying about the loss of their account with the Fed or Federal Reserve, in addition to other types of prosecution for banking cannabis. And what the Safe Banking Act seeks to do is say to these financial institutions that if you are banking cannabis in accordance with federal guidelines and your state's own laws, both with respect to banking and cannabis, your examiners aren't going to, pull your charter. They're not going to punish you. The Fed isn't going to pull your account with it. The FDIC or the NCUA isn't going to pull your insurance, and you otherwise are not going to be punished. What is important to note about the Safe Banking Act, however, is that it doesn't mandate banking. So once this passes, banks and credit unions are not obligated to start banking cannabis. It only gives them more of a green light than the FinCEN guidance gives them to do so. So while we hope that the day that this passes, cannabis banking is just going to be absolutely normalized and everybody is going to suddenly have access, the reality is it's still going to take some time for banking to open up more than it already has currently for the cannabis industry. So hopefully once this passes, we'll start to see bigger and bigger players coming in. I don't expect to see the amount of due diligence that goes into opening up a cannabis related account to lower. So I wouldn't say that the timetable for opening a cannabis account is going to be lessened. And what this really means for a cannabis business is that hopefully it'll be more of a normalized process to get a bank account, which means really being able to walk into your neighborhood bank or credit union and telling them, look, I'm a legitimate cannabis related business. Here are all the licenses. Here are all the records that you need for your due diligence. And the bank or credit union is more likely than not going to say, okay, here's your questionnaire. Here are all the things we need from you. Here's how long we expect for it to take for you to open up an account. And it becomes, again, normalized.
Well, thank you, Sahar. Corey, want to hit any of these bullet points?
Yeah, again, I think it'll be similar to what we saw in the hemp and CBD world. Just talking to a lot of compliance officers when it became federally legal, be able to do hemp CBD. Talking to a lot of compliance officers, they're like, until we see the rules, regulations, we understand the risk associated with, banking that industry. We don't know the timing around it. And as we all saw, even trying to get rules and regulations around the hemp industry has taken a long time. So again, I think it'd be a great thing once it gets passed, so that at least we have that to move forward and create some more comfort for the banking industry to bank the cannabis industry. But again, I think it'll be slow process, especially banks are known to be fairly conservative to begin with. But again, the compliance officers getting up to speed with what are the rules and regulations, how do they abide by them. So it'll be a great thing, and I hope it gets through soon, so at least that process can start.
Yes, yeah, very good comments. Why don't we move on to the next slide? So what does this actually mean? The big questions that I get all the time are, can we accept MasterCard and Visa? And, right now the answer is no. And there's many reasons for that. So if you go to a dispensary and they're accepting MasterCard and Visa, they are probably what they call mislabeled, which means they're telling MasterCard and Visa they are a pizza shop or a florist or something other than cannabis. Sahar, go ahead and give us your opinions on MasterCard and Visa at the retail level.
So MasterCard, Visa, I'll put American Express into there as well, the major credit card networks have for quite a while not really been too keen on entering the cannabis space until there is federal legalization. The Safe Banking Act doesn't specifically address merchant processing, which is something key to remember. And so if I had my crystal ball, I would say that it is less likely that Visa and MasterCard or general merchant processing is going to become wholly available to the cannabis industry upon the passage of the Safe Banking Act.
And Corey, what do we see out in our client base? And as a point of reference, Bridge West has about 500, maybe even more than 500 cannabis license holders nationwide. So we get a broad spectrum of information from our clients. Corey, what do you see?
Yeah, and again, most of our clients, well, all pretty much all of them, we have some outliers that we become aware of that in order to get Visa or MasterCard, they've said they've been a flower shop. One that I'm thinking of happened about a year ago. That I think it was MasterCard finally figured out they're not a flower shop, so it ended up tying up the money that was being processed through MasterCard, about $90,000. Took them about 8 to 9 months to finally get that money from the processor. So again, that's where we always say be straightforward with the vendors that you're dealing with, whether it's a bank, creditor, or vendors. And then kind of tagging on, I always get that question around the Safe Banking Act, if that'll automatically pull in Visa and MasterCard. And again, we're in alignment with Sahara in regards of that won't happen for the industry again for a long time until some other rules and regulations come into place.
Yes. As my mom used to say, honesty is the best policy. Be transparent with your bank, be transparent on credit card processing. If you're a hemp or a CBD company, I think there's a window there for MasterCard and Visa. Is that correct, Sahar?
Correct. Window being the operative word there.
Yeah.
Not a giant open doorway.
And why is it, and I shop occasionally at dispensaries, why is it that I can use my debit card at a dispensary?
So PIN debit has often been viewed as a quote safer alternative to credit card processing, because with PIN debit, there's a little bit more of an identity verification step there. And the money is already sitting there. No one has to extend credit for the funds. But it should be noted that even with PIN debit processing, you're still really using the railways, the networks from these major companies. So it's not a total clear green light. Yes, absolutely do it. It's at best gray area murky, I would say.
Thank you. And Corey, what kind of advice do we offer our clients when it comes to PIN debit cards?
Yeah, we again just be aware of the fact that there could be some issues when you're processing, but for the most part, our clients have had a good experience in utilizing that. Not too much of an issue.
Yes, and it certainly adds some cost. One thing I've noted is if you spend, $28, they'll round it off to $30 on your debit card. So they do tend to round up to the nearest $5 increment, it seems. Let's go to the next slide. So what are some of the alternative choices if you can't take MasterCard and Visa? How do you operate and how do you determine if this is a legitimate or high risk? So what are some of the best practices for implementing a third-party processor? This would be for PIN debit or MasterCard Visa for CBD and hemp companies. Sahar, you want to start out?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, you want to understand what your transactions are going to be coded as. You definitely don't want to run into a situation where, as we've been discussing, you're miscoding your transactions, because in my opinion, frankly, there is nothing worse than doing that. So have a thorough understanding of exactly how a third-party processor is going to be running the funds from the moment that they, from the moment of the swipe until the moment that it lands in your account. Ask them whether all of the financial institutions with whom they're working are aware of the exact nature of their business and of the businesses who are going to be using their services. Again, harp as much as you can on the categorization of the transactions. Uh, Ask them a little bit more and dig around about the exact process to understand whether they need a money transmitter license. I straight up ask them, have you spoken to state regulators about needing a money transmitter license? If you haven't, why not? If you have, what has the feedback been? Don't be afraid to ask too many questions, because when it comes to something like this, you want to over ask rather than just trust and wake up one morning and realize you've been blacklisted and now are incapable of having access to any kind of processing as a result.
Yes, and if you're blacklisted, that can go on for the rest of your business career. Is that true?
Correct. And that's irrespective of the type of industry that you enter. So you could start a bakery the next month and you still would be blacklisted.
Very good information. Thank you, Sahar. Corey, any comments?
No, just a quick question. What does that mean, blacklisted then?
To be blacklisted means you really are put on a list with the processors, with the major networks. That makes it so that if you are affiliated with an application for merchant services, again, that requires the use of their railways or their networks, you more likely than not will not be given an account or will not be given an MCC code.
Thank you.
Yes.
And then
Very
Jim, just
important information.
yeah, just real quick. And then in regards to third-party processor, definitely get referral sources from them. Quite a couple that we work with, they actually have a strong relationship with banks within the marketplace that they're working with. Be very cautious. Again, look for third-party referrals. And then finally, if it doesn't feel right, it's probably not right. And probably the best example, I think this might have been a couple of years ago, there was a third-party processor that they're actually going to process the money over into the UK and then bring it back into the States. And I had a client that asked me what I thought, and that I definitely did not feel good about that, just because you're moving money out of a country back into the country. So just be very cautious and go with your gut reaction.
Yes, very good advice. As a policy with the Bridge West, we've really shied away from international banking. And although we do have clients in Canada, we feel safe doing business with Canada. But when people start talking about, financial institutions in the Cayman Islands, the Virgin Islands, our antenna goes up. And as Corey said, if your gut doesn't feel good about it, it's probably not something you want to do. Let's go to move on to our next subject.
Hey, Jim,
Yeah,
just real quick before we move on, we did have a question from someone. It was, as cannabis businesses, is there anything they could or should be doing to support the Safe Banking Act. Sahara, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say get in touch with your representatives, and have, to the extent you're capable of reaching them and getting some time with them or with their legislative aides, really walk them through the importance of this, continue to push for it, make sure that your needs are visible to them and that the need for the Safe Banking Act has a voice behind it and that your voice is included in that.
Yes, good advice. Don't be afraid to reach out to your congressmen and senators. Let them know your opinions on this. That's the best way to go. They do actually listen to you. They do read their emails and their comments. So good advice, Sahar. Don't be afraid to reach out to the Congress. Okay, I think we're ready to move on. Okay, now we're going to talk about bank loans. So the Safe Banking Act, keep in mind that is going to get banks to feel good about checking accounts. We've talked about merchant services, so it doesn't look like the Safe Banking Act would help us obtain merchant services for retail transactions. But what about other bank services? As we saw those fees at the beginning of the presentation, those fees are for a checking account. It's not banking services. So what other banking services, though, might we see coming into the marketplace? We're starting to see some banks offer first mortgages at reasonable rates, but they almost all involve personal guarantees. And as I like to say, nothing will keep you up at night if you have a personal guarantee on a multi-million-dollar loan and your business may not be cash flowing. So we have different types of loan, real estate, equipment financing. So we're going to hit these subjects right now. I'll start this time with Corey.
Yeah, and again, we're pleasantly surprised to see within 2021 that there is some more, I'll call it traditional bank loans taking place with some of our cannabis clients. So historically, in probably as if you're an current operator looking to get funding, we see rates anywhere from 12% to 18%. Even within the sale leaseback that we've had a lot of our larger clients do, that's ranging from about 14 to 16% there as well. So very costly money, especially when you think about the fact that this is not tax deductible at all. So as I mentioned, we are seeing some traditional banks come in and some cannabis banks come in and actually do a real estate loan. Quite a few of the transactions have been where the real estate is held in a separate entity. But there does have to be cash flow to support the loan. So again, not very many startup operators are able to get a real estate loan. And again, what we're seeing is personal guarantees are required for obtaining a loan, which that's more of it aligns with the traditional loan in the marketplace. And I think there was a public company on the West Coast, I'm forgetting their name. I think they did about a $12 million loan at 8% with a 1% origination fee, which is a significant improvement from whatever we've seen in the past, which has been pretty much nil.
Yes, those origination fees can be very, very expensive when you start talking 3 and 4 and 5 points to close a loan. That just eats up a large part of what you're borrowing before you even get the money into your checking account. Sahar, your comments on these points.
Yeah, I mean, we've started to see a little bit more lending, especially with respect to real estate and some equipment. But the issue with lending tends to be collateralization and the fact that it's rather difficult, tricky, and a patchwork of rules to be able to collateralize cannabis licenses specifically. And then once it comes time to act on the collateral, there's a whole set of state-by-state rules that have to be considered with respect to that, and the question of whether or not a financial institution actually wants to take control of a cannabis license and run a cannabis operator. And so I would hope that we start to see more and more traditional lending happening with respect to cannabis businesses beyond just real estate or equipment. But I think that that is going to be something that the industry is going to have to continue working toward.
Correct. So we won't be seeing unsecured lines of credit anytime soon.
I wouldn't say so.
Now, one thing we always recommend to our clients is to keep that real estate in a separate company, be the landlord.
Yes, to the extent that that's possible, that is always a good option more than not.
Yes, because Corey can speak to that, but it keeps the avenue nice and clean that technically the bank is not lending to a cannabis business.
Yeah, I think that definitely helps a lot. One thing though, and Sahar kind of touched on this, is what we do see is, or we did have one client that it was a private equity organization that actually funded the debt, and now they want to take it over because the organization is struggling to the point that the debtor is like, we want to take it over, but their issue, because the value of the license is significant. It has huge value. However, they're not able to convert their debt into an equity position because they are not able to get through the qualifications of being a licensed owner. So again, that's why banks, they understand that there's significant value within a license, but they know that the opportunity to have that licensed title transfer is very challenging.
Yes, very good points. All right, any final comments before we move on? Okay. And Brooke, are we getting any questions?
I'm not seeing any new questions rolling in.
Okay, so our next subject is fees. And as we saw from the survey at the beginning, many of the attendees to this webinar are paying significant fees. And what we thought we'd talk about on this slide is, why is that? And the reason, in my opinion, and I'll turn this over to our panel, is if the bank is going to, or the credit union more likely, is going to offer checking accounts to cannabis clients, they basically have to build a brand new, robust vetting system, internal control, due diligence within the bank, including site visits. So that's what can drive the fees at the banking side. I'm going to let Sahar start out with this one.
Yeah, so that was really well put, because when it comes to banking cannabis, all that we really have and all that we have had since Valentine's Day of 2014 has been the FinCEN guidance, which is just a few pages, some red flags, some STAR filing requirements. That's really about it. We do have states that have come up with their own cannabis banking guidelines or rules even, but the resounding requirement has been a compliance, really a compliance protocol that's specific to cannabis related clients. So in order to be able to take on tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 clients, a financial institution has to put together a specific due diligence protocol that goes through everything they need to look for when they're onboarding a cannabis related client, and everything that they need to continue to look for as a part of ongoing due diligence. And to do due diligence, even initial due diligence on a cannabis related client, can sometimes be quite a timely feat. There are financial institutions that will go through the entirety of, for example, a licensed operator's application, which can be hundreds, if not 1,000 or a couple thousand pages. So it takes a lot of time, it takes specialized skill. And then there's also, more risk than not, at least currently, that's related to taking on a cannabis or cannabis related client and running cannabis related funds through the financial institution. So these costs are really there to cover both the time and the effort it takes to create and maintain a cannabis program in a financial institution, and to also cover the cost of the risks that go into taking cannabis funds into the institution.
Yes, so you can see there's quite a bit of behind the scenes activity at the financial institution. And Corey and I occasionally have lunch and meet with our friends in the banking industry. Corey, you want to share some of our experiences?
Yeah, one of the biggest question that we always get or pushback is they get frustrated about the fee associated with it, and unfortunately, it's just part of being in the industry. And for the 30% of our audience that doesn't have banking, I'm sure they would be willing to pay for sure if there was $1,000 a month fee, jump on that, just because trying to pay a utility company, most utility companies won't take cash. So then you end up running around to Western Union, and you want to pay your employees. Again, now all of a sudden, the employees, two things, you need to move that location or how you do that around. And then the employees have the issue of depositing their paycheck in the form of cash. And then it's all the security and inefficiencies around that. So I always say, if you're able to get banking, again, the process of obtaining banking can be very challenging, especially out in California, where we're seeing some movement in the banking industry. But now we're looking for a certain level of volume that you've been in existence. Then they have to figure out how to bring in your cash into the system that you've already built up. Again, around the fee, we feel, even though it's painful, it's a significant expense of being in the business. It's much better off as in regards of operations moving forward.
Yes, and one thing that if you're applying with a bank or changing banks or credit unions, they're going to look to see that you have a robust accounting system and financial reporting system. So I'm giving a bit of a commercial here for Bridge West, but just in general, work with your CPA firms, work with your controller, have a CFO. I mean, you can't have a $20 million a year company in sales and not have a CFO. You can't run it by the seat of your pants. So put the effort into your accounting system, and that will greatly help your relationship with your financial institution. Let's see. Are we good with this slide? Did Sahar or Corey have any more comments?
No, there's a couple questions.
Oh,
one is interest expense deductible on equipment loans? And unfortunately, the answer is no. It is not deductible according to the revenue code.
Yep, not at this time. What Corey's referring to is IRS code section 280E that allows for the deduction, or really it's an adjustment to income for your cost of goods sold or your cost of production or your cost of cultivation. But anything outside of that, the IRS's position is not deductible under an old anti or war on drugs from the 1980s rule. It says only, there's no deduction, in fact. And then they acquiesced on cost of goods sold because it's not really a deduction. Yes, unfortunately, we've been to tax court on that issue a half a dozen times or more. And the IRS has not lost a case on 280E as of yet. So we have to live with that. You have to plan around it. You have to have enough margin to cover your expenses and your taxes, and hopefully have some profit left over. All right, is there another question, Corey?
Yeah, but I'm going to hold off. It's more towards the end, if that's all right.
Yep.
And then one thing, I think Sahar kind of touched on this, Jim, you touched on it again, but in regards of the banking compliance, they'll be looking for monthly financial information. They will be tying out your revenue number that you're reporting back to what's been reported, deposited into your account, what you're reporting to the state. They will do quarterly visits. Inventory compliance is huge. And then adherence to your SOPs is significant as well. So that's why I think Jim was emphasizing the fact, just making sure you get good records, following standard operating procedures is so important, even if you're running a vault system with the hope or intention to be able to get banking at some point.
Very good. Very good points. What's our next one?
Yep, keep going.
Okay. So where do you get your capital? Where do you get a loan? Where do you get investors? You know, what's out there? What are investors and lenders looking for? So how can a cannabis business owner determine the best selections for their business? You know, we certainly see a lot of multi-state operators, we call them MSOs, who either are in more than one state or want to be in more than one state. And they make very, very good partners if you're a startup in a state that just got legalized cannabis. Don't be afraid to talk to these MSOs and see what kind of terms they're offering. They're going to want a big chunk of your business. A lot of times they want over 50% so they have control. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, because your MSOs have made all the mistakes there are to make. And if you're new to the industry, if you've just been awarded a license, you can avoid making all those mistakes that first-time cannabis companies make. So that's one big source. I think I'll let Corey jump in here.
Yeah, and again, because we've seen kind of the market turn in regards of valuation, especially on the publicly traded MSOs, which helps all the other operators in regards of valuation, that there has been an appetite for more capital to come into the marketplace. But again, whether it's coming, we'll see more of a convertible debt, maybe with some warrants attached, if the organization is still trying to create positive EBITDA, because they want a better collateral position with the right to convert into an equity position. And those rates, I was just looking at one, I think it was at 12%, again, with a conversion rate at like 80-90% of valuation. It could be triggered by a couple different things. And then family and friends for a lot of our smaller first-time startups is probably the best choice when you get going. And then also the other thing is, we see a lot more competition for the capital, especially as more and more markets come online, with Illinois doing the dispensary license, with Massachusetts trying to catch up, a lot of activity on the East Coast, a lot of interest in New York, New Jersey just coming out with their applications. So the people that do have the money, they do have a lot more choices out there as well.
Yes, and Sahar, if you're an investor and you're going to get into a partnership or a lending transaction with a cannabis company, a cannabis license holder, they could be pre-operation or they could have been running for a while, but what kind of scrutiny can an investor expect from the regulators in the state that they're going to invest in?
That tends to vary state by state. It tends to vary by how much ownership an investor will have, especially if this is a licensed cannabis business. It tends to vary with respect to the amount of ownership that they'll have. It tends to vary with the amount of control that they'll have, whether they'll have, for example, board seats, directorships, management rights, things like that. But generally, my advice is to prepare for more scrutiny than not. Be prepared to be disclosed on a cannabis licensee's license application. Make sure that, if you're a fund, for example, the members of your fund are okay being disclosed. If you are an LLC, that your members are okay being disclosed. Be prepared, especially if you're going to take on a larger amount of ownership or have control or management or direction over the business. Be prepared for potential fingerprinting. Don't just expect that you're going to put money in and then you're just going to pull money back out. Understand that you are entering a highly, highly regulated market. And in order to be able to reap the rewards that are available in this market, you're going to have to play along with the applicable state and local requirements.
Well, very good. And one further comment I would make, and I'll pass this one on to Corey, is seriously consider getting audited financial statements right from the get-go. It will lower your cost of capital. It will increase the value of your company. And especially down the road, if you go to sell, if you can provide 5 years of audited financial statement to your potential buyer, it can add a lot of value to your company. Corey, we do a lot of that kind of work, right?
Yeah, we do perform a lot of audits, but one key thing is, and I think this kind of comes to one of our questions that we have around due diligence. And I did an article maybe about an hour ago, or a year ago, basically just saying that, especially within the cannabis industry, so highly regulated and a lot of caution and concern with the industry. But in regards of audited financial statements, we've had some clients that have been looking to sell, however, sell to a multi-state operator, publicly traded MSO or multi-state operator. However, there was an audit requirement on the transaction, on the seller, to get audited financial statements. And that wasn't able to be performed because the inventory needs to be observed at the end of the year. So one thing we recommend to our clients is just have a CPA firm observe your inventory at the end of the year. So if there is an exit strategy, maybe that's not your current plan, but you never know if it's the right offer, that you would have that. But then also, again, this comes back to banking, the IRS, M&A work, or financing, is good corporate records, good accounting records, and good standard operating procedures, because those are the key items that any potential company that would be looking to buy you would be looking at, the IRS will be looking at, investors, lenders, they will all be doing due diligence around those four categories. So we just can't emphasize enough that taking care of those on a monthly, annual basis is so important to do, because again, we've seen deals not get done because those things weren't in order. And the buyers in the marketplace, they do have a lot of choices. So they might be in a time frame that they're not going to wait. They're going to just move on to the next deal.
Yes. And on all these issues, feel free to reach out to Vicente Cedarberg or us here at Bridge West. We'd be happy to consult with you on any of these areas. If some of the things you've learned today, or you're saying, hey, we need to look into that, we'd be happy to take your call, any of us here. I think that might be down to our last slide. Oh yes, this is our last slide, but it's the big issue. It's kind of the new issue on social equity. We're doing some social equity consulting in various states, such as Illinois, that has a robust social equity program. And so what that means is they're looking to see minorities and women on your application as owners. And the red flags that have gone up almost immediately is, what percentage of ownership does your minority partner, your social equity partner need to have? And what is their role? Are they truly a partner? Are they truly in operations? Or are they just there in name only, and the profits are going to be funneled to around the social equity partner, and they're just being used to get those extra points on the application? So those are some of the challenges that we've seen pop up in social equity. I'm going to let Sahar come in with her comments.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I'll just add that social equity is, in addition to factors such as gender, also includes income level and incarceration as a result of the war on drugs. And I really cannot stress enough the importance of social equity in the cannabis space. It really is an opportunity to begin to rectify all of the damage that's been done by the war on drugs and by other discriminatory policies that we've seen as related to drug policy in the US. And unfortunately, we continue to see banking being a challenge, not just for the entire industry, but specifically social equity licensees or social equity groups or individuals that are seeking a license, given first and foremost the high cost of cannabis banking. And so I really do urge financial institutions to be even more active when it comes to social equity applicants. Really think more about what they can do one by one to figure out how to create greater access for social equity applicants when it comes to banking, because banking really is such an integral part of being able to successfully run a cannabis business. And it really is a chance that needs to be afforded to social equity applicants to further accomplish the goals of social equity in the cannabis space.
Well, thank you, Sahar. And Corey, we're doing a lot of application work these days. You want to talk about our new division that's working in these areas?
Yeah, I think what Jim's referring to is we've pulled together a team of people to help on the application process. And social equity actually is a significant component of that. But one of the things I guess I want to take on to, I know within the state of Illinois and even the conversation in New York regarding social equity licensees, is both states recognize that even though the social equity licensee winner, that there's still going to be challenged in regards of the capital to start up the operations. And even as Sahar indicated, some of them probably don't even qualify for traditional banking and the operational aspect. So I know the states, they're talking about creating a fund to help provide the loan for starting up the operations, as well as trying to provide some resources for these operators in regards of how do you run a dispensary? How do you run one within the cannabis industry? Make sure that you are compliant, as well as dealing with the other issues within the cannabis industry. So again, just trying to get those things aligned, and the state recognizing, how do we help these winners of licenses be successful in the marketplace is so vital.
Yes, very good points. And it goes back to, don't be afraid to partner up with an experienced operator. We see too often that people jump into this, they think it's a pot of gold, and it's actually a lot of hard work, and you have to do things exactly right if you're going to show an after-tax profit. It is, I think the others on the line will agree, it is not a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So that brings us to the end of our time slot. I think we have a couple of minutes left. Do we have any questions?
We do. One is simple. There's a question if we perform audits on the East Coast. Definitely we do. They're full audits. Majority of the work is done remote. However, we do obviously come out and do site visit. Another item is, can you elaborate on cannabis banking rules at the state level? Which state have rules and what requirements do they entail beyond the FinCEN guidance? I guess I'll ask Sahar that.
You got cut off at the very end for me there. Could you just repeat that last part?
Sure. Can you elaborate on cannabis banking rules at the state level? Which state have rules and what requirements do they entail beyond FinCEN guidance?
So there are certain states that have put out general, I would say, guidelines. Washington State, for example, being one of the very earliest. I think California has some guidelines as well. And those really tend to mirror the FinCEN guidance pretty closely. They'll tend to focus also on the state's own specific cannabis rules. They'll tend to highlight some of the licensing requirements when it comes to actual cannabis operators. But what we've seen really are offshoots and I would say greater elaborations on the FinCEN guidance. So it's not a complete divergence from that.
Good comments. And I have a few that come up on my screen that I can take care of quickly. We might run over a few minutes, but I still think it's worth it to address some of these questions. One is, can you get a copy of the recorded seminar? Yes, we are recording this, and you have our contact information on the screen. We'd be happy to give you a link on our website that you could listen to this again. Here's another quick one. Under state laws, the cost of cannabis license deductible? The answer is yes for cultivation, but no for retail. Corey, would you agree with that?
Yeah, for the most part. And that gets a little tricky, especially if it was an acquisition of a license. Or an acquisition of a company with a license. So there are some nuances to that. So you just have to be very careful when you're looking at that.
Yes, because if it's not really a license, if it's really goodwill that you're purchasing, most likely the amortization of that goodwill will not be deductible for tax purposes. Here's another one that for Corey and I, are there any unique accounting and due diligence efforts, say, different from your average company when it comes to cannabis company, IPOs, mergers and acquisitions? And I would say that the one that really jumps out at me is a rule of thumb for many mergers and acquisitions outside of cannabis is EBITDA, earnings before interest, depreciation, amortization, and taxes. Well, taxes can be extremely high where your overhead is not deductible. So that is one multiple that really is not that applicable to the cannabis industry. What you really want to look for if you're looking at an acquisition and you're looking at someone who's been operating for a while is what is their after-tax revenue? What is their after-tax net income? What is their before-tax income? How much taxes are they paying that? Are they in a 50, 60, 70, or even a higher tax bracket? That's what I really look to when I look at profitability consulting. And it really comes down to your gross profit because that's what you're taxed on. Corey?
Yeah, again, I think I kind of touched on it, just your traditional things, good corporate records, good books and records, as well as your financial statements, as well as standard operating procedures being adhered to.
Very good. And this one might be an easy one. What is an MSO? That stands for multi-state operator. So we have a lot of those. And as I said, it's either a multi-state operator, or there's a lot of successful cannabis companies out there that want to be multi-state operators. So say they're hypothetically being very successful in Michigan. They might want to recreate their business model in Massachusetts, say. So if they're not an MSO, they might want to be an MSO. And those folks as I said, they can make you a very good partner if you're in startup mode. That's what I have on my screen. Did you have any other questions, Corey, that popped up for you?
This would be for Sahar. Will passage of the SAFE Act help hemp and CBD banking challenges?
I think the SAFE Act, although it really is geared toward cannabis, because hemp and CBD for so long have been lumped into the same generalization as cannabis, because of that, I do think that this will further help to open up banking for hemp and CBD as well.
Very good. Anything else?
Yeah, I just have the last question is that does the panel know of any availability of 401k plans for cannabis industry? Are there, the one that we bump into is the TPA's Rocky Mountain. But are there other operators? And again, we've run across that quite a bit with our clients. And again, it's one of those things that we've seen it where a client has been able to start a 401k plan or retirement plan, but then the provider ends up pulling out. So I don't know, Sahara, what is your experience in that area?
Tends to vary. I don't really have like one specific provider that I can point to and say, this is going to be a solid, non-changing, long-term option for you.
Yes, well, there's a couple things there. As Corey said, we see a lot of, some of the field agents who tend to be, very good salesmen. Oh, yes, we can do this. We can have a 401k, and they get it going. But then after it gets up to the compliance department back in the home office, then they back out. So we've seen more probably backouts and we've seen successful ones. The other thing is most likely those employer contributions would not be deductible. Do you agree, Corey?
Only to the extent that it relates to non-deductible payroll. But if it relates to the production side, we've been able to allocate that and get the deduction.
Very good. Okay. Well, we've hit a lot of subjects today on the financial side of the cannabis business. I want to thank Corey Parnell and Sahar Anasazian. And as you have our contact information there, we'd be happy to follow up. And I think with that, I'm going to say goodbye. Corey and Sahar, you want to say goodbye?
Thanks so much for joining, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. And I believe we'll be emailing all the participants that registered this a link to the presentation as well as the PowerPoint presentation. So again, thank you. And if there were other members of your team that they weren't able to join this call, but you thought it was good information for them to hear, besides us emailing out, it will be posted on our website, so they can always jump there and listen to it. So again, thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Okay, very good. And thank you to Brooke Burkhart and our marketing team, Nancy D'Amato and Joanna Castle, for doing all the backroom work for us. Thank you all very much. I think that I'm going to say over and out.